good evening, or perhaps it is very early morning where you are. Welcome to a quiet place, here on Mind Lepic. Tonight, we will walk slowly together through the soft, unhurried days of long ago. Days when life moved at the pace of clouds crossing a wide sky. When people rose with the light and rested when the light faded. When the smallest routines carried their own gentle rhythm. Before we begin, I wonder, where are you listening from tonight? What country holds you right now? What city or town surrounds you as these words drift toward you? There is no need to answer out loud. Simply let the thought settle. Like a leaf coming to rest on still water. Wherever you are, the same moon that once watched over those old mornings now watches over yours. Tonight's story carries us back to the small market towns and farming hamlets of Northern Europe during the later part of the 17th century and the opening years of the 18th, a time when the great wars had moved on to other borders, when the years between 1680 and 1720 brought long stretches of ordinary peace to many villages. We will not speak of kings or battles. We will speak instead of the baker who opened his oven door each dawn, of the weaver whose loom tapped softly through the short winter afternoons, of the woman who carried a wooden yoke across her shoulders to fetch water from the stream, of the slow turning of seasons marked by the smell of fresh bread, the creak of a wooden gate, the feel of woolen stockings pulled on in a chilly room. These were the days when most people never traveled more than a day's walk from the place they were born. Their world was small, and because it was small, every detail inside it mattered. The way the frost patterned the inside of a window pane, the exact sound a wooden spoon made when it tapped the side of a clay pot, the faint warmth that lingered in a blanket that had been hung by the hearth all day. Let us begin, then, very gently. Imagine it is late autumn. The year is 1697, and we are standing just outside a low stone and timber house on the edge of a village called Thornwick, a real place once, though its name has softened and changed over the centuries. The house belongs to a family named Hale. Thomas Hale, his wife Margaret, their 3 children, and an elderly aunt who still spins flax at the fireside even though her eyes have grown cloudy. The roof is thatched with fresh reed from the river meadows, replaced only 2 summers ago, so it still smells faintly green when rain falls. The walls are thick, built of fieldstone gathered by Thomas's grandfather, mortared with clay and cow dung in the old way. Inside, the main room is warmed by a single open hearth, whose smoke rises slowly to a hooded chimney. There are no glass windows yet, only wooden shutters that can be closed against the wind, and small openings covered with stretched and oiled linen to let in a little pale light. It is just past 6 o'clock in the morning. The sky is the color of pewter. A thin mist lies over the fields. Thomas is already outside. He wears a woolen coat that reaches his knees, patched at the elbows, the color of wet slate. His hands, rough from years of scythe and plow, are wrapped around a wooden bucket. He walks the narrow path that leads behind the house to the well. The path is worn smooth by 3 generations of feet. His own, his father's, his children's. Each step makes a small crunch on the frost that still holds the ground. When he reaches the well, he sets the bucket down and winds the rope slowly. The wooden bucket he pulls up is damp and cold. The water inside so clear it looks almost silver in the weak light. He carries 2 full buckets back, 1 in each hand, moving with the careful balance of a man who has done this walk 10,000 times. Inside the house, Margaret has already kindled the fire. She kneels on the packed earth floor, feeding small sticks to the glowing heart of last night's embers. The fire makes a soft, breathing sound. She wears a linen coif over. her hair and a heavy woolen skirt the color of dried sage. Around her shoulders is a shawl that once belonged to her mother, frayed at the edges, now, but still warm. The youngest child, little Sarah, 4 years old, sits on a low stool near the hearth. She is wrapped in a blanket, her bare feet tucked beneath her. She watches the flames with round, serious eyes. Every so often, she reaches out one small hand toward the warmth, then pulls it back again, as though testing a promise. Margaret speaks to her daughter in a low voice. "Fetch the oat pot, love. The big one with the crack." Sarah slides down from the stool and pads across the floor. Her night shift reaches almost to her ankles. The pot she brings is heavy brown earthenware, chipped along one rim but still sound. Margaret takes it, fills it halfway with water from Thomas's bucket, and sets it on the iron trivet over the fire. Into the water she measures 2 large handfuls of oats. Coarse, stone ground, the last of the harvest from their own small plot. While the oats begin their slow heating, she takes a wooden bowl and fills it with buttermilk from the tall crock that stands in the coolest corner of the room. The buttermilk is thick, slightly sour, the way it should be after sitting overnight. She cuts 2 thick slices from yesterday's rye loaf, the crust dark and hard, the inside still soft enough to tear. Thomas comes in now, bringing the sharp smell of frost and wood smoke on his coat. He sets the buckets near the door, stamps his boots once to loosen the earth, then hangs his hat on the wooden peg. "Morning, wife," he says quietly. "Morning, husband," she answers without looking up from the pot. It is the same greeting they have used for 17 years. Nothing fancy, nothing new. Just the small anchor of voices that says the day has begun the way it should. The older children, 10-year-old John and 8-year-old Eliza, are stirring now in the loft above. You can hear the rustle of straw mattresses, the soft creak of the ladder as John climbs down first. He is tall for his age, already almost to his father's shoulder, with the same quiet brown eyes. Eliza follows, her hair still tangled from sleep, rubbing one eye with the back of her hand. They sit at the long trestle table that stands near the hearth. The table is old, scarred from knives, smoothed from years of scrubbing with sand and water. On it, Margaret sets the bowl of buttermilk, the bread, and a small wooden dish of salt. Breakfast is simple. Each person takes a piece of bread, dips it in buttermilk, eats slowly. The oats bubble gently in the pot. Margaret stirs them now and then with a long wooden spoon, making sure they do not catch on the bottom. When they are thick and steaming, she spoons them into wooden bowls, one for each person, including Aunt Agnes, who has come down from her corner bed, and now sits wrapped in her shawl, nodding a little as though still half in a dream. They eat without hurry. Outside, the mist is beginning to lift. A weak sun shows itself behind thin clouds. Somewhere a cock crows once, then again. A dog barks far off across the fields. After breakfast, Thomas goes to the barn. The barn is built against the house, sharing the same roof line. Inside, 2 cows stand in their stalls, a red one named Blossom and a black one named Moore. They chew slowly, their breath making small clouds in the chilly air. Thomas forks fresh straw under them, checks the water trough, milks them one after the other. The milk comes in steady streams, warm and frothy, into the wooden pail. He carries the pail back to the house, where Margaret will set some aside, for cheese and the rest for drinking and cooking through the day. Meanwhile, Margaret sweeps the floor with a besom made of birch twigs. She moves in slow, wide arcs, gathering yesterday's crumbs and bits of straw that have come in on boots. The sweeping makes a soft, whispering sound against the earth. When she is done, she sprinkles a little water from the bucket and sweeps again. darkening the floor so it will not rise in dust. John and Eliza have their own small tasks. John carries armfuls of split wood from the stack outside and builds it neatly beside the hearth. Eliza takes the wooden trenchers from breakfast outside to the yard, where she scrapes them clean with a knife and rinses them in a bucket of cold water. She hangs them on the pegs under the eaves so the wind can dry them. Aunt Agnes sits by the fire and spins. Her spindle is a simple piece of turned wood, weighted at the bottom with a small round whorl of slate. She draws the flax fibers from the distaff tucked under her arm, twisting them into thread with practiced fingers. The wheel beside her turns with a low, steady hum when she gives it a push with her foot. The sound of spinning is one of the constants of the house. Gentle, repetitive, almost like breathing. The morning moves on like this. No hurry, no loud voices, only the small music of daily life. The crackle of the fire, the clink of a wooden bowl, the soft thud of boots on the path, the distant lowing of cows, the patient turning of the spinning wheel. By mid-morning, the mist has burned away completely. The sky is pale blue, streaked with high, thin clouds. The air smells of wet, earth and wood smoke and the faint sweetness of the last apples still hanging on the trees behind the house. Thomas walks out to the field with his son. They carry scythes over their shoulders. The winter wheat needs one last check before the real cold comes, pulling any weeds that have crept in, making sure the drainage ditches are clear. They work side by side, not speaking much. The scythes make a slow, whispering sound as they move through the grass at the field's edge. Back at the house, Margaret kneads dough for the next baking. She works on the long table, her hands and forearms dusted with rye flour. The dough is heavy, dense, rye, and a little barley mixed together. She folds it, presses it, turns it, over and over, until it is smooth under her palms. When it is ready, she shapes it into two large, round loaves and sets them near the hearth, to rise slowly in the warmth. The day continues in this way, one small task following another, each one done with care, each one part of a pattern that has held steady for as long as anyone can remember. And now, if this slow beginning has brought a little calm to your breathing, if your shoulders have begun to soften against the pillow, then perhaps we will keep walking together, step by gentle step, deeper into this quiet world. If you feel relaxed with Mind Lepic, you can like if you want. You can subscribe if you feel it helps you relax more. For now, though, simply rest. Let the words drift. Let the pictures form slowly behind your eyes. The afternoon arrives slowly, as afternoons always did in those years. By 11:30, the pale sun has climbed as high as it will go in late November. It gives light but little warmth, hanging low in the southern sky like a silver coin, half hidden behind thin gray veils of cloud. The air is still, almost heavy with the scent of damp leaves and the faint smoke from every chimney. In the village, Thomas and John have returned from the field. Their boots are dark with wet earth. Small clumps of soil cling to the hems of their breeches. They pause at the door to knock the worst of the mud from their soles against the stone. Step, 3 gentle taps, each before stepping inside. The house smells now of rising dough and the slow-cooking oats that were breakfast but have become a warm midday pottage for the animals later. Margaret has moved her work to the trestle table near the single small window. The oiled linen lets in a soft, milky light that falls across her hands as she mends. She is repairing a tear in Thomas's winter coat, the one lined with sheepskin. The needle she uses is bone, polished smooth by years of use. The thread is linen spun last spring by Aunt Agnes. She stitches with small, even movements, pulling the thread through slowly so it does not knot. Every few stitches she pauses to smooth the wool with the flat of her hand, feeling for any roughness that might chafe against skin when the real cold comes. Eliza sits beside her mother on the low bench. She is learning to darn stockings. In her lap lies a gray woolen stocking, belonging to her brother, John, worn thin at the heel from walking the same paths day after day. Eliza threads her own smaller needle with care, her tongue caught lightly between her lips in concentration. She makes tiny stitches, crossing over the hole in a lattice pattern the way Margaret has shown her 100 times. Sometimes the thread tangles. She stops, untwists it patiently, and begins again. There is no frustration in her face, only the quiet focus of someone who knows the work will be finished in its own time. Sarah, the littlest, has been given a scrap of cloth and a blunt wooden needle. She sits on the floor near the hearth, pushing the needle in and out, making long, wandering stitches that look more like drawings than sewing. She hums softly to herself a tuneless little song made of the sounds she hears around her, the crackle of the fire, the creak of the house settling, the distant cluck of hens in the yard. Every so often she holds up her work for Margaret to see. Margaret smiles, nods once, and says, "That's coming along nicely. Love." Sarah beams and returns to her stitching. Outside, the village moves at the same gentle pace. Across the lane lives Widow Grayson, whose husband was lost to a fever 6 winters past. She is sweeping her doorstep with a besom exactly like Margaret's, the birch twigs whispering against the packed earth. Her cat, a thin gray creature with one white paw, sits on the low stone wall, watching her with half-closed eyes. Further down the lane, young Peter, the cooper's apprentice, rolls an empty barrel toward the workshop. The barrel makes a low, rumbling sound as it turns over the uneven ground. He stops every few paces to wipe his brow with the sleeve of his shirt. Though the day is cool, in the fields beyond the last houses, 2 men from neighboring farms walk the headlands together, checking the boundaries marked by low hedges of hawthorn. They carry stout sticks, not for fighting, but for parting brambles and testing the softness of the ground. Their voices carry faintly on the still air. Short sentences, pauses between words, laughter that is soft and brief. They speak of the weather mostly. Whether the frost will hold tonight, whether the river will rise with the next rain, whether the miller has enough grain stored to see the village through until spring. Back inside the Hale house, the loaves have risen. Margaret lifts the cloth that covers them. The dough has swelled into smooth domes, the surface faintly dimpled where the yeast has worked. She shapes them once more with floured hands, pressing gently, then scores the tops with a sharp knife in a simple cross. Thomas has already built up the fire, so the brick oven built into the side of the hearth is hot. The oven mouth glows a dull orange. Margaret uses a long wooden peel, a flat spade made of oak, to slide the loaves inside. The heat meets the cold dough with a soft hiss. She closes the iron door and turns to other work. While the bread bakes, she prepares the evening meal. Into a large iron pot she puts a piece of salted pork from the flitch, hanging in the chimney, dark, firm, smelling faintly of smoke and salt. She adds a handful of dried peas, a few sliced turnips from the clamp in the yard, a sprig of dried thyme saved from summer, and water from the bucket. The pot goes onto the trivet over the fire. It will simmer slowly all afternoon, filling the house with a deep, comforting smell that promises warmth when night falls. Aunt Agnes has not moved from her corner. Her spinning continues. The wheel turns with the same steady rhythm. The thread grows longer on the bobbin. Sometimes she pauses to wind the finished thread onto a wooden, niddy-noddy, a simple frame shaped like two open hands, then starts again. Her lips move silently, counting the turns out of long habit. Her face is calm, almost dreamy. The work is so familiar that her hands know it better than her eyes do. John has gone to the river meadow with a sickle to cut the last of the rushes before the frost hardens them too much. Rushes make good thatch repairs and can be twisted into ropes or mats. He works alone, swinging the sickle in slow arcs, gathering the cut stems into bundles tied with twine. The meadow is quiet except for the rustle of dry grass and the occasional call of a crow flying overhead. When his arms are full, he carries the bundles back to the yard and stacks them neatly under the eaves to dry. Eliza finishes her darning. She holds up the stocking for inspection. The heel is patched now, the stitches small and tight. Margaret takes it, turns it inside out, runs her finger along the repair. "Well done," she says simply. Eliza's cheeks flush with quiet pride. She folds the stocking and places it on the shelf beside John's other clothes. The bread is ready. Margaret opens the oven door. A wave of hot, yeasty air rushes out, carrying the deep brown smell of baked rye. She draws the loaves onto the peel, taps the bottom of each one. Hollow sounding, just right. She sets them on the wooden rack near the window to cool. The crusts crackle softly as they settle. Mid-afternoon passes like this. One task flows into the next without hurry. The fire is fed. The pot is stirred. A child's question is answered in a low voice. A tool is sharpened with a whetstone. A blanket is shaken and refolded. The day breathes in and out, steady as a sleeper's chest. As the light begins to slant lower, the sky turns the color of old pewter once more. Shadows lengthen across the yard. A thin wind stirs the bare branches of the apple trees, making them tap gently against the house wall. Somewhere a bell rings once, distant, muffled. The evening Angelus from the small stone church at the center of the village. It is not a summons to hurry, only a reminder that the day is rounding toward its close. Thomas returns from checking the fences. His face is reddened by the cold air. He hangs his coat, washes his hands in the basin by the door, dries them on the rough towel that hangs there. Margaret pours him a mug of small beer from the wooden jug. Weak, slightly sour, made from the second running of the barley. He drinks it standing, then sits by the fire. The family gathers slowly. Sarah climbs onto her father's knee. Eliza brings the mended stocking to show him. John stacks the last armful of wood. Aunt Agnes lets the wheel come to rest. The pot bubbles softly. The bread waits, still warm. The firelight moves across the walls like slow water. Everything is in its place. Everything continues as it has for years beyond counting. And if your breathing has grown slower now, if the weight of the day has begun to slip from your limbs, then perhaps this quiet afternoon has done its gentle work. We will walk on together when the moment feels right. The light fades earlier now, in the way of late autumn days that seem to hurry toward evening, without quite meaning to. By 4 o'clock, the sky has softened to a deep dove gray, and the first thin shadows stretch long across the yard. The air carries a sharper chill. It finds its way through the smallest cracks around the door and window shutters, making the fire inside feel all the more welcome. Inside the Hale house, the main room has grown warmer, closer. The hearth fire has been built up with thicker logs, oak and ash split last spring, so that flames rise steady and golden, casting a gentle, moving light across the low-ceiling beams and the whitewashed walls. The smell of baking bread lingers still, now mixed with the deeper, richer scent of the pork and pea pottage that has simmered since midday. Every so often, Margaret lifts the heavy lid of the iron pot, stirs once with the long spoon, and lets the steam rise in slow curls before replacing the lid. The bubbling is soft, almost a murmur, like distant rain on leaves. Thomas sits on the settle by the fire, the long wooden bench with its high back that keeps the drafts from his shoulders. He has pulled off his boots and set them near the hearth to dry. The leather steams faintly. In his hands he holds a wooden bowl of the small beer, turning it slowly between his palms as though warming them as much as the drink. His face, lined from years of sun and wind, looks softer now in the firelight, less weary, more at rest. Sarah has climbed onto the settle beside him. She leans against his arm, her small body wrapped in the same blanket she wore at breakfast. Her eyes are heavy, but she fights sleep the way children do, blinking slowly and watching the flames dance. Every few moments she points at a spark that jumps up the chimney and says, very quietly, "Look, Papa, a star going home." Thomas nods each time, murmurs something low that only she can hear, and strokes her hair with one large, careful hand. Eliza has taken up a different task now. She sits cross-legged on the floor near her mother's feet, sorting dried herbs from the bundles that hang from the rafters. There are bunches of thyme, marjoram, sage, and hyssop, gathered in high summer and tied with twine. Their leaves brittle now, but still fragrant when crushed between her fingers. She separates the leaves from the stems, dropping them into a small earthenware jar. The work makes a faint rustling sound, and every so often a tiny cloud of herb dust rises and catches the firelight like pale smoke. Margaret glances over now and then, offering a word of guidance. Mind the sage doesn't crumble too fine, love. But mostly she lets the girl work in her own quiet way. John has come in from the yard with reddened cheeks and cold hands. He stands for a moment by the open door, letting the chill air rush past him before closing it firmly. Then he goes to the corner cupboard and takes out the whetstone and a small jar of oil. He sits on a low stool near the light of the fire and begins sharpening the sickle he used earlier. The stone moves along the curved blade in long, even strokes. Slow scrape, slow scrape. Each pass followed by a gentle wipe with an oiled cloth. The sound is rhythmic, soothing, like the slow turning of a water wheel far off. When the edge gleams sharp enough to catch the firelight, he tests it lightly with his thumb, nods to himself, and sets the tool aside on the shelf where the other blades wait in neat order. And Agnes has moved her spinning wheel a little closer to the hearth. The warmth helps her fingers stay limber. She draws out the flax in long, fine strands, twisting them between finger and thumb before letting the spindle drop and spin. The wheel hums low and steady. The spindle turns with a soft whir. Sometimes she pauses to wet her fingers at her lips, old habit, to help the fibers catch, and then continues. The thread on the bobbin grows thicker, pale gray against the dark wood. She does not speak much, but once she looks up at Sarah and smiles, a small, slow smile that reaches her cloudy eyes. Sarah smiles back, sleepy and content. Outside, the village quiets further. A neighbor's dog barks once, then falls silent. A shutter is drawn closed with a soft wooden thud. The wind moves through the bare orchard, making the last dry leaves scrape along the ground like tiny footsteps. Far off, from the direction of the church, comes the single toll of the evening bell again. Deeper now, more resonant in the cooling air. It rings 3 times, then stops. No one hurries toward it. It is only the day saying good night to itself. Margaret rises to check the pottage once more. She tastes it with the tip of the spoon, nods, then adds a small pinch of salt from the wooden bowl on the table. The salt is coarse, grayish, brought by pack horse from the coast last spring. She stirs again, slowly, letting the heat do its patient work. Then she takes one of the cooled rye loaves, places it on the table, and cuts thick slices with the big bread knife. The knife moves through the crust with a quiet crunch. The inside is dark and close-textured, still faintly warm. She sets the slices on a wooden trencher and covers them with a clean cloth to keep the softness. Supper will be simple, as always. The pottage ladled into wooden bowls, a slice of bread for each person, a little buttermilk if anyone is still hungry after. No one expects more. No one wants more. The meal is enough. Warm, filling, familiar. As the sky outside turns fully to charcoal, the family draws closer together. Thomas pulls the settle nearer the fire. Margaret brings extra stools. Eliza gathers the herb jar and sets it safely on the high shelf. John banks the fire with a fresh log so it will burn, slow and steady through the evening. Sarah curls smaller against her father's side, her eyelids drooping now without fight. They eat in near silence at first. The only sounds, the soft clink of wooden spoons against bowls, the crackle of the fire, the occasional sigh of the wind finding its way under the door. Then, as bellies fill and warmth spreads, a few quiet words pass between them. Thomas speaks of the river meadow, how the rushes were good this year, thick and long. Margaret answers that the last of the apples should be gathered tomorrow before the hard frost comes. John says he saw a hare at the field edge this afternoon, white already in its winter coat. Eliza asks if they might make a small pomander with the dried orange peel. Widow Grayson gave them last week. Aunt Agnes murmurs that the flax is spinning finer than usual this batch. The conversation drifts like smoke. Small, unhurried, without beginning or end. No one rushes to finish a thought. No one interrupts. The words simply rise and settle again, part of the room's gentle breathing. When the bowls are empty and the bread eaten to the last crust, Margaret clears the table slowly. She wipes each bowl with a damp cloth, stacks them on the shelf. The trenchers are scraped clean and set to dry. The fire is tended once more. Sarah is asleep now, head resting on Thomas's shoulder, small mouth open, breathing slow and even. Thomas lifts her carefully and carries her up the narrow ladder to the loft, where the straw mattresses wait under heavy woolen blankets. He tucks her in beside her sister, pulls the covers high, kisses her forehead once. Eliza follows, climbing the ladder with sleepy grace, whispering good night to the room below. John stays a little longer, feeding the fire one last small log. Aunt Agnes lets her wheel come to rest. She winds the last of the thread and covers the spindle with a square of linen. Margaret banks the fire for the night, piling ash over the glowing coals so they will smolder gently until morning. The house grows quieter still. The wind outside softens to a whisper. The fire makes small settling sounds. From the loft comes the faint rustle of children turning in their sleep. Thomas and Margaret sit together on the settle for a little while longer. They do not speak. They simply sit, shoulders touching, watching the last flames curl and fade. His hand finds hers. Their fingers lace together without hurry. In the dimming light, their faces look peaceful, carved from the same quiet years. When the fire has burned low enough, they rise. Margaret checks the door latch once more. Thomas blows out the single tallow candle that had been lit for supper. Darkness comes soft and complete, broken only by the faint red glow from the hearth. They climb the ladder together, footsteps careful on the worn rungs. In the loft, under the thatch that smells faintly of reed and smoke, they settle into their own shared bed. Blankets are pulled high. Breathing slows to match the breathing of the sleeping children nearby. The house sleeps. The village sleeps. The fields lie still under the first stars. And if your own eyelids have grown heavy now, if the slow turning of this ordinary evening has wrapped itself gently around your thoughts, then perhaps the night is ready to carry you a little deeper. We will meet again in the next quiet morning whenever you wish. Morning returns as it always does, slowly, without announcement. The year has slipped a little further now. It is the first week of December in 1697. The nights have grown longer, the days shorter, and the frost has begun to settle more firmly each dawn. Inside the Hale house, the air holds the cool stillness of a room that has slept through the dark hours. The hearth fire has burned down to a faint red glow beneath a blanket of ash. Only the smallest threads of warmth still rise from it. The first sound is the soft creak of the ladder as Thomas descends from the loft. His stockinged feet meet the packed earth floor without noise. He moves to the hearth, kneels, and with careful hands brushes aside the ash to reveal the sleeping embers. He feeds them small pieces of kindling. Dry twigs gathered yesterday, then a few thin splits of pine. The embers catch almost at once. Tiny flames appear, hesitant at first, then steadier. He blows gently once, twice, until the fire breathes again. The room begins to warm, inch by inch. Margaret follows soon after. She comes down the ladder wrapped in her shawl, hair still loose beneath her night coif. Without a word, she takes the iron kettle from its hook, fills it from the bucket that stands near the door. Water left from last night, now chilled almost to ice, and sets it on the trivet over the new flames. The kettle is black with years of soot. Its handle is wrapped in old cloth to keep hands from burning. While the water heats, she sweeps yesterday's hearth ashes into a wooden pail for later use in the garden soil. The children stir above. First Eliza, then John, then little Sarah, who wakes with a small sigh and rubs her eyes with tiny fists. They climb down one by one, bare feet padding on the wooden rungs. Sarah is carried the last few steps by her mother. She nestles against Margaret's shoulder, still half in dreams. The family gathers near the fire. No one speaks loudly. The morning is too quiet for that. Margaret measures oats into the brown pot again. 3 good handfuls this time, for the cold has sharpened appetites. She adds a pinch of salt, stirs once, and lets the pot sit at the edge of the fire where the heat is gentler. The oats will thicken slowly as the water warms. Thomas brings in fresh milk from the morning milking. The pail steams in the chill air of the room. He pours a little into each wooden bowl, then sets the rest aside in the crock. The milk is rich, creamy at the top, the way it comes straight from Blossom and Moore. Breakfast unfolds without hurry. Warm oats spooned into bowls, a swirl of milk stirred through, a crust of yesterday's bread torn and dipped. They eat sitting close to the hearth, letting the fire warm their fronts while the room behind them stays cool. Sarah eats slowly, blowing on each spoonful until it is just right. Eliza carefully scrapes every bit from the sides of her bowl. John eats steadily, already thinking of the day's work ahead. Aunt Agnes joins them at last. Moving with the careful steps of age, she sits on her low stool and accepts the bowl Margaret brings her. Outside, the world has turned white overnight. A thin layer of frost covers the yard, the thatch roof, the stone wall along the lane. The air is sharp and clean. Each breath leaves a small cloud. The sky is pale, almost colorless, with the sun still hidden behind the eastern ridge. No birds sing yet. Only the occasional soft cluck from the hens in their coop, muffled by the cold. After breakfast, tasks begin again in their familiar order. Thomas pulls on his heavy coat, wraps a woolen scarf around his neck, and steps out to check the animals. The barn door creaks as he opens it. Inside, the cows stand quietly. breath steaming. He forks more straw beneath them, cleans the stalls with slow, deliberate movements, then milks again. The second milking of the day, lighter now but still warm and steady into the pail. When he returns to the house, he sets the milk near the coolest wall and hangs his coat to thaw by the fire. Margaret has already begun the day's washing. She fills the large wooden washtub with water heated in the kettle, adds a handful of wood ash, lye saved from the hearth, and stirs until it clouds. Into the water go the family's small clothes, linen shifts, caps, stockings, things that need frequent cleaning even in winter. She scrubs each piece against the ridged washboard, her arms moving in a slow, steady rhythm. The water sloshes gently. Soap bubbles rise and pop with faint crackles. When each piece is clean, she wrings it out by hand, twisting firmly, then carries the wet bundle outside to the line strung between two apple trees. The clothes freeze almost at once in the cold air, stiffening into strange shapes that will thaw and dry later when the sun finally climbs higher. John helps his father split wood in the yard. They use the heavy maul and wedges. The oak logs crack open with a deep, satisfying sound that carries across the still morning. Each split piece is stacked neatly against the house wall, ready for the weeks of cold ahead. The work warms them despite the frost. Their breath rises in steady clouds. Their cheeks redden. They pause now and then to rest the maul, to wipe sweat from brows with coat sleeves, to exchange a quiet word about how straight the grain runs this year. Eliza stays inside to help her mother. She carries armfuls of dry kindling from the stack under the eaves, building it beside the hearth in careful layers. Then she takes the broom and sweeps the floor again, moving in wide, slow arcs, gathering the small bits of straw and earth that have come in on boots. When the floor is clean, she sprinkles water from a dipper and sweeps once more, darkening the earth so dust will not rise. The broom makes its familiar whispering sound against the ground. Sarah follows Eliza like a small shadow. She carries a tiny besom made from twigs. Too small to do real work, but she sweeps anyway, mimicking her sister's movements. Every so often she stops to watch the fire, or to pick up a stray crumb from the table and carry it carefully to the hens outside. Her cheeks are pink from the cold when she returns. Margaret wraps her in an extra shawl and sits her near, the warmth with a scrap of bread to nibble. Aunt Agnes has returned to her spinning. The wheel turns with the same low hum. The flax draws out in fine, even threads. She works closer to the window now, where the pale daylight falls across her lap. Her fingers move without looking. Her eyes rest on the fire instead, half-lidded, peaceful. The thread winds onto the bobbin in slow spirals, growing thicker as the morning passes. By mid-morning, the frost has begun to melt in patches where the sun finally reaches. Small drops fall from the eaves, tapping softly on the stone step below. The yard turns muddy in spots. Boots leave deeper prints now. The sky has lightened to a thin, wintry blue, streaked with high clouds that move slowly from the west. Thomas walks to the churchyard to speak with the sexton about the woodpile for the church fire, simple matters of sharing labor and fuel through the coldest months. He carries a small bundle of kindling as a gift, wrapped in an old sack. The path is frozen hard underfoot. His steps make a crisp, crunching sound. Along the way he nods to neighbors. Widow Grayson sweeping her step again. Young Peter rolling another barrel toward the cooper's shed. Words are few. A raised hand, a quiet morning, and on he goes. Back at the house, Margaret has moved to mending again. This time it is John's breeches, torn at the knee from a fall in the field last week. She patches with a square of sturdy wool, stitching in small, tight rows. The needle flashes in the firelight. The thread pulls through with a faint whisper. Eliza sits beside her, practicing her own stitches on a scrap of linen. Their heads bend close together. The room holds only the soft sounds of needle through cloth. Fire settling, kettle hissing as more water heats. The day continues in this gentle way, one small rhythm following the next. The washing freezes and thaws on the line. Wood is split and stacked. Thread is spun and wound. A child hums. A fire crackles. The frost retreats a little more with each passing hour. Nothing hurried, nothing loud, only the quiet certainty that the world turns slowly, and all things necessary will be done in their time. And if this ordinary winter morning has settled something soft inside your chest, if your own breathing has found a slower, deeper pace, then the afternoon will unfold just as gently when you are ready. The afternoon of this early December day arrives with a stillness that feels almost deliberate. The thin winter sun has climbed only halfway up the southern sky before it begins its slow descent again. Its light is pale gold now, slanting low across the frost-softened fields and catching on the icy patches that still cling to the north-facing walls of the houses. The air holds no wind, only a crisp, quiet cold that makes every sound seem farther away. The distant creak of a cart axle on the lane, the soft thud of an axe splitting kindling somewhere down the village, the occasional low moo from a cow in a nearby byre. Inside the Hale house, the main room has grown comfortably warm. The fire has settled into a steady, even burn. Logs of ash and oak glow red at their hearts, sending up small tongues of flame that flicker without hurry. The smell of the morning oats has long faded, replaced now by the faint, comforting scent of drying wool stockings hung near the hearth and the deeper, earthy aroma of the last turnips. Margaret has set to roast in the embers at the fire's edge. She wrapped each turnip in a damp leaf from the garden, buried them shallowly in the ash, and now they cook slowly, their skins charring just enough to crack open when the time comes. Margaret herself sits at the trestle table with a pile of mending before her once more. Today it is the children's night shifts. Thin linen worn soft from many. Washings that need small. Repairs at the seams and hems. She works by the light that falls through the oiled linen window, supplemented by the fire's glow. Her needle moves in and out with the same patient rhythm. Each stitch is small, precise, almost invisible when finished. She pauses now and then to rethread the bone needle, licking the end of the linen, thread and guiding it through the eye with a gentle twist of her fingers. The thread is strong but fine. Spun by Aunt Agnes months ago, it pulls smoothly without snarling. Eliza sits beside her mother on the bench, her own small hands busy with a different sort of work. She has been given the task of carding wool, combing the clean, washed fleece that Thomas sheared from their 2 sheep last summer. The wool lies in soft, pale heaps on the table. Eliza takes small handfuls, draws them between the pair of wooden carding brushes, and works them until the fibers lie smooth and parallel. The brushes make a soft, brushing sound. Shush, shush, like leaves stirred by a light breeze. When a batch is ready, she rolls it into a loose rowlog, a fluffy cylinder ready for spinning, and sets it in the basket at her feet. Her movements are slower than her mother's, more careful. She stops frequently to pick out any tiny bits of twig or leaf that escaped the first cleaning. Margaret watches without speaking, only nodding once when the rowlog looks particularly even. Sarah has found a quiet corner near the hearth. She sits on the low stool that once belonged to her grandmother, legs dangling, a scrap of wool in her lap. She tries to copy Eliza's carding with her bare hands, pulling the fibers apart and twisting them clumsily between her fingers. The result is lumpy and uneven, more like a bird's nest than proper wool, but she works with complete seriousness, tongue caught between her lips. Every so often she holds up her small creation for Margaret to see. "Look, Mama, a cloud for the sheep," she says softly. Margaret smiles, reaches over to smooth the wool a little, and says, "That's a fine cloud, love. The sheep will be warm under it." Sarah beams and returns to her gentle pulling and twisting. John has gone outside again after the wood splitting. He carries a wooden yoke across his shoulders now, 2 empty buckets swinging from the chains at either end. The path to the well is familiar under his feet, frozen in places, muddy in others where the midday sun reached. He walks steadily, breath clouding in front of him, the yoke creaking faintly with each step. At the well, he lowers the first bucket, winds the rope with slow turns of the handle, pulls it up dripping and silver bright. The water is so cold, it numbs his fingers through his woolen mittens. He fills both buckets, balances the yoke once more, and makes the return journey without spilling a drop. When he steps back into the house, he sets the buckets near the door, stamps the snow from his boots, and hangs the yoke on its peg. Margaret pours him a mug of the warmed small beer that waits on the trivet. He drinks it standing, steam rising from the mug to mingle with the room's warmth. Aunt Agnes has not left her spinning wheel all day. The hum of it has become part of the house's background music. Low, constant, reassuring. Her thread grows longer on the bobbin. She has already filled one and started on a second. Every half hour or so she pauses to wind the finished yarn onto the niddy-noddy, counting the turns under her breath. 40, 50, 60, then ties it off with a small loop of twine. The skeins hang from a wooden peg on the wall, pale and soft, waiting to be washed and dyed. Later in the spring, when the madder and weld plants send up new growth, her face remains calm, eyes half closed against the firelight. Her fingers know the work so well they need no watching. Outside, the village carries on its own slow afternoon. Widow Grayson has lit her own fire. Thin smoke rises straight up from her chimney in the windless air. Young Peter the cooper hammers gently at a barrel stave inside his workshop. The sound comes in measured taps, never rushed. Further along the lane, the miller's cart returns empty from the next hamlet. The horse plods with lowered head, hooves muffled on the frosty ground. No one calls greetings loudly. A raised hand from a doorway, a nod across a yard is enough. The day asks nothing more. Back inside, Margaret rises to check the turnips in the embers. She uses the poker to draw them out one by one. Their skins are blackened, cracked open to reveal steaming white flesh beneath. She sets them on a wooden platter to cool just enough to handle, then slices each one open with a small knife. The insides are sweet, almost nutty from the slow roasting. She places the platter on the table, scatters a little salt over them, and covers the slices with a clean cloth to keep the warmth. They will be part of the evening meal. Simple, hot, filling against the growing chill. As the light outside begins to dim once more, turning the windows to soft gray squares, the family draws closer together again. John brings in another armful of wood and builds the fire higher for the coming evening. Eliza finishes her last rowlog and sweeps the small bits of wool from the table into her apron, carrying them outside to scatter for the birds. Sarah has fallen into a light doze against the settle, her small hands still loosely holding her wool cloud. Margaret lifts her gently, carries her to the warmth of the hearth, and tucks a blanket around her shoulders. Thomas returns from checking the fences along the back field. His coat is dusted with frost that has formed again in the shade. He hangs it near the fire, sits heavily on the settle, and stretches his legs toward the warmth. His hands, rough and cracked from cold and work, rest on his knees. Margaret brings him the platter of roasted turnips. He takes a slice, eats it slowly, savoring the heat and sweetness. The room fills with small sounds. The crackle of the renewed fire, the soft breathing of the sleeping child, the distant tap-tap of a neighbor's hammer fading into evening quiet. The afternoon slips away without fanfare. Light fades to twilight. Shadows lengthen across the floor. The fire glows brighter against the growing dark. Tasks end, one by one, and are put away until tomorrow. The house settles deeper into itself, warm against the cold world outside. And if this gentle, December afternoon has carried you a little further into stillness, if your body has begun to feel as heavy and calm as the old settle by the hearth, then perhaps the evening will wrap itself around you just as softly when the time comes. Twilight settles over, Thornwick like a soft woolen blanket drawn slowly across the fields. The pale December sky has deepened to a bruised violet at the edges, fading to charcoal overhead, where the first faint stars prick through. No moon yet, only the lingering afterglow of the sun that slipped behind the low ridge an hour ago. The frost that melted in patches during the day has begun to reform. Small crystals glitter faintly on the thatch, roofs, and along the stone walls whenever a last ray of light catches them. The air is sharp, motionless, carrying the clean scent of frozen earth and wood smoke that drifts from every chimney in the village. Inside the Hale house, the main room glows with the steady amber light of the hearth fire. The logs have burned down to a bed of bright coals now, edged with white ash. Thomas has just added 2 fresh pieces of oak, laid them carefully so the flames can catch without smoke. The new wood crackles softly as it warms, sending up thin spirals of scent. Resinous, comforting. The room feels smaller in the evening, closer, as though the darkness outside has pressed the walls gently inward around the family. Margaret stands at the trestle table, preparing the evening meal with the same unhurried movements she has used for years. The iron pot still simmers from midday. She has added a few more, handfuls of dried peas and a knob of salted butter churned last week. The butter melts slowly into the pottage, turning the surface glossy and rich. She tastes once more with the long spoon, nods to herself, then ladles the thick mixture into 5 wooden bowls, one slightly larger for Thomas, one smaller for Sarah. Steam rises in slow curls from each bowl, carrying the deep, savory smell of pork, peas, turnips, and thyme. Beside the bowls she sets the last of the rye bread, cut into thick slices. The crust is dark and crisp, the inside still faintly warm from being kept near the fire all afternoon. A small wooden dish of coarse salt stands in the center of the table, and a jug of small beer, freshly drawn from the barrel, in the cool corner, waits to be poured. The family gathers without being called. They simply drift toward the table as the light fades, drawn by the warmth and the smell. Thomas takes his place at the head of the settle. He has washed his hands and face in the basin by the door. Droplets still cling to his beard. Sarah climbs onto his knee as usual, nestling against his chest with her blanket pulled tight. Eliza sits on the bench beside her mother, folding her hands in her lap until everyone is ready. John stands for a moment by the fire, warming his back, then pulls up a low stool and sits close enough that the heat reaches his face. Aunt Agnes moves last, settling onto her own small chair with a soft sigh. Her shawl is drawn, high around her shoulders against the draft that sneaks under the door. They do not rush to eat. First, Thomas bows his head slightly, The others follow. No long prayer. Just a quiet moment of thanks spoken in the silence of the room. Then spoons are lifted. The pottage is eaten slowly, spoonful by spoonful, blowing on each one to cool it before it touches the lips. The bread is torn, not cut further. Pieces are dipped into the thick broth until they soften and soak up the flavor. Sarah eats daintily, careful not to spill. Every so often she offers a small spoonful to her father, who pretends to take a tiny bite and murmurs, "Just right, love." The only sounds are the soft clink of wooden spoons against bowls, the occasional crackle from the fire, and the faint rustle of blankets as Sarah shifts on Thomas's lap. When the bowls are nearly empty, Margaret brings the platter of roasted turnips that cooled earlier. She slices them open again. The insides are golden now, sweet and steaming. Each person takes one or two pieces, sprinkling a little salt, and eating them with the last of the bread. The turnips are tender, almost creamy, their flavor deepened by the long, slow cooking in the embers. No one speaks much during the meal, only small, murmured comments. "The peas cooked well this time," or "the butter makes it richer," or "Sarah's quiet." Warm inside now. The words float and settle like leaves on still water. After supper, the clearing away is done with the same gentle pace. Margaret stacks the bowls. Eliza carries them to the washing bucket near the door. John pours a little hot water from the kettle over them, swirls each one clean with his hand, and sets them upside down on the shelf to dry. Sarah helps by carrying the small salt dish back to its place, walking very carefully so as not to spill a single grain. Thomas banks the fire for the long night ahead, piling ash over the glowing coals, leaving just enough air for them to smolder through until morning. The room grows a shade dimmer, the light softer, more golden at the edges. With the table cleared and the hearth tended, the evening opens into its quiet hours. Aunt Agnes returns to her spinning wheel, though she works more slowly now. The hum lower, almost a lullaby. The spindle drops and turns. Thread winds on in fine, even spirals. She does not hurry. There is no need. The work will wait for tomorrow if her hands tire tonight. Eliza has taken up a small piece of embroidery, a simple sampler she began last month. She sits near the fire with her hoop and needle, stitching tiny crosses in red wool thread. The pattern is basic. A house, a tree, the letters of her name. Each stitch is careful. She counts them under her breath sometimes, though she knows the count by feel now. The firelight catches on the needle as it flashes in and out. The wool gleams softly against the linen ground. John sits cross-legged on the floor, with a wooden puzzle his grandfather carved years ago, a set of interlocking pieces that form a small box when fitted together correctly. He turns the pieces slowly in his hands, trying one way, then another. There is no frustration when they do not fit. He simply tries again, patient as the turning seasons. Every so often he glances at the fire, watching the coals shift and settle. Sarah has grown sleepy against her father's chest. Her eyelids droop. Her small hand clutches the edge of his coat. Thomas rocks her gently, almost without moving. Just a slight sway of his shoulders. He hums a low tune, wordless, the same one his own mother hummed to him long ago. The sound is soft, barely above a breath, blending with the crackle of the fire and the distant creak of the house timbers, cooling in the night. Margaret sits beside Thomas on the settle, her hands idle for once. She has unpinned her coif and let her hair fall loose down her back, thick, dark brown, streaked with a few silver threads now. She leans her head against her husband's shoulder, closes her eyes for a moment, and simply breathes. The room holds them all in its quiet embrace. the slow breathing of the child, the soft turning of the spinning wheel, the faint click of needle against hoop, the puzzle pieces tapping together, the fire's gentle settling. Outside, the village has gone to rest. No lamps burn in windows anymore. Only the faint red glow from a few hearths leaks around shutter edges. A dog barks once, far off, then falls silent. The wind has died completely. The frost can form undisturbed now, patterning the grass and the thatch in delicate white lace. The stars grow brighter overhead, sharp and cold, watching over the sleeping hamlets as they have for centuries. Inside, time feels suspended. No one looks at a clock. There is none to look at. The evening simply deepens, moment by moment, until eyelids grow heavy and limbs soften against cushions and settles. One by one, the children are carried or led to the loft. Sarah first, limp with sleep in her father's arms. Eliza next, rubbing her eyes but climbing the ladder without protest. John last, setting the puzzle pieces carefully back in their wooden box before following. Thomas and Margaret stay a little longer by the dying fire. They speak in low voices, about the woodpile that needs replenishing, about the cow that may calve early in the new year, about how quickly Sarah is growing. The words are few, familiar, without urgency. Then they too rise. Margaret checks the door latch once more. Thomas blows out the single rushlight that had been lit for the evening. Darkness comes soft and complete, broken only by the faint red pulse of the banked coals. They climb the ladder together. Blankets are drawn high. Breathing slows to match the breathing of the sleeping children nearby. The house settles into silence. The frost thickens outside. The stars wheel slowly. Another ordinary night passes in Thornwick, calm and unbroken. And if this peaceful evening has wrapped itself gently around your thoughts, if your own body feels heavy now, sinking deeper into rest, then perhaps the next dawn will find you still carried in this quiet current. Dawn creeps in on the quietest of feet. When the oats are ready, thick, steaming, faintly nutty, he spoons them out. Each bowl receives a swirl of milk, a small pat of butter dropped in the center to melt slowly. The rye bread from 2 days past is sliced thin, toasted lightly at the fire's edge until the crust crisps and the inside warms through. They eat sitting close together, spoons moving without haste, blowing on each mouthful until it is just bearable. Sarah eats half from her own bowl, half from her father's. He pretends not to notice when she steals another spoonful. The meal passes in near silence. Only the fire speaks, crackling softly, and the spoons clink against wooden bowls. Outside, a single cock crows once, distant and muffled by the frost. No other sound disturbs the morning yet. After breakfast, the day's work begins quietly. Thomas pulls on his thick woolen coat, winds the scarf around his neck, and steps out to the barn. The door creaks open. Inside, Blossom and Moore stand with their breath making white clouds. He forks fresh straw beneath them, checks the water trough, breaking the thin ice with his boot heel, then milks them slowly. The milk comes in steady streams, warm against the cold metal of the pail. When he returns to the house, he sets the milk in the coolest corner and hangs his coat near the fire to thaw the frost from its hem. Margaret turns to the day's bread-making. The last rye loaves are gone. Today she will bake again. She measures coarse rye flour and a little barley into the large wooden trough, adds a handful of sourdough starter saved from yesterday. Sour-smelling, lively, and warm water from the kettle. She kneads with strong, steady hands, folding and pressing the dough over and over until it comes together smooth and elastic under her palms. The work takes time. She does not hurry. Flour dusts her forearms and the front of her apron. When the dough is ready, she shapes it into 2 large rounds, scores the tops with a quick cross, and sets them near the hearth under a clean linen cloth to rise in the gentle heat. John helps his father carry water from the well. They take the yoke between them, 2 buckets each trip. The path is slippery with frost. They walk carefully, boots crunching on the thin white layer. At the well, the rope is stiff with cold. Thomas winds it slowly while John steadies the buckets. The water comes up clear and bitterly cold, splashing against the wooden sides. They make 3 trips, filling the house buckets and the larger barrel that stands just inside the door. Each time they return, they stamp frost from their boots and warm their hands at the fire for a moment before going out again. Eliza stays inside to help her mother. She sweeps the floor first, wide, slow arcs with the birch besom, then carries armfuls of dry wood from the stack under the eaves and builds it neatly beside the hearth. When the dough has risen, she helps Margaret slide the loaves onto the long wooden peel. Thomas has built the brick oven hotter now. The mouth glows dull orange. Margaret pushes the loaves inside with a gentle thrust. The heat meets the cold dough with a soft hiss. She closes the iron door and turns back to other tasks, mending a tear in one of John's mittens, the woolen thread pulling through slowly. Sarah follows her sister like a small echo. She carries a tiny basket of kindling, sticks, no thicker than her fingers, and places them one by one beside the fire. Every few minutes she stops to watch the flames, or to warm her hands by holding them out, palms open. Margaret gives her a scrap of dough to play with. Sarah shapes it into a tiny loaf, then a bird, then flattens it again, humming softly to herself the whole time. Aunt Agnes has settled at her spinning wheel near the window. The pale morning light falls across her lap as she draws out the flax. Her fingers twist the fibers. The spindle drops and spins with its familiar whir. The wheel turns when she nudges it with her foot. Slow, steady, almost meditative. She does not speak. She simply works. Her face calm, eyes resting sometimes on the fire, sometimes on the frost patterns, forming and melting on the inside of the oiled linen pane. By mid-morning, the sun has risen higher, though its light remains weak and slanting. The frost begins to retreat in patches where the rays reach. Small drops form at the edges of leaves, drip slowly from eaves, tap against the stone step. The yard turns from white to muddy brown in spots. Boots leave darker prints now. The sky holds a thin, wintry blue, cloudless, cold. Thomas walks to the orchard to check the apple trees. He taps each trunk lightly with a stick, listening for the hollow sound that means the wood is sound, not rotted beneath the bark. He gathers the last few windfalls that escaped notice. Small, hard apples, half frozen, and carries them back in his coat pockets. They will be pared, sliced, and dried near the fire for winter use. Margaret opens the oven door. A rush of hot, yeasty air fills the room. She draws the loaves out on the peel. They are dark brown, crusty, tapping hollow when she knocks the bottoms. She sets them on the rack to cool, the crusts crackling softly as they settle. The smell wraps around the house, deep, warm, promising. The morning drifts onward in its gentle way. One task flows into the next without pause or hurry. Water carried, dough kneaded, thread spun, wood stacked. A child hums, a fire breathes. The frost melts, drop by drop. Nothing demands haste. Everything arrives in its own time. And if this slow winter morning has eased something deeper inside you, if your limbs feel heavier now, your breathing slower, more even, then the afternoon will unfold just as quietly when you choose to meet it. The afternoon of this mid-December day arrives, wrapped in the softest hush. The sun, having risen late and low, now hangs only a hand's breadth above the western horizon, its light thin and golden, almost watery. Long shadows stretch eastward across the frost-dusted fields. Shadows of bare hedges, of the low stone walls that divide one plot from the next, of the solitary oak that stands at the edge of the village common like an old sentinel. The sky has paled to a delicate pearl gray. No clouds move across it, only the faintest veil of high mist that softens the edges of everything. The air remains bitterly still. Even the smallest breath of wind would be welcome now, for it would stir the cold and make it feel less heavy. Inside the Hale house, the main room glows with the accumulated warmth of the morning fire. The oak logs have burned down to a deep bed of coals, steady and red at their hearts, sending up occasional small flames that dance without haste. The smell of fresh-baked rye bread lingers strongest, deep, nutty, comforting, mingled now with the faint sweetness of the dried apples Thomas brought in earlier. Margaret has sliced a few of those small, hard windfalls and set them on a wooden tray near the hearth to soften in the warmth. Their skins have begun to wrinkle, their flesh to turn translucent and honey-colored as the slow heat draws out their last sweetness. Margaret sits at the trestle table once more, this time with a large wooden bowl of wool in her lap. She is teasing the clean fleece, pulling it apart gently with her fingers to loosen any remaining tangles before it goes to the carders. Her movements are slow, deliberate. Each pull separates the fibers without breaking them, leaving them airy and light. The wool makes a soft, whispering sound as it parts, like pages turning in an old book. She works without looking down much. Her eyes rest sometimes on the fire, sometimes on the children, trusting her hands to know the work. Eliza has taken over the carding brushes now. She sits on the low bench beside her mother, drawing small handfuls of the teased wool between the wooden cards. The brushes rasp gently against each other. Shush, shoosh, aligning the fibers into neat, parallel strands. When enough is carded, she rolls it into a loose rowlog and places it in the growing pile in the basket. Her cheeks are flushed from the nearness of the fire. Every so often she pauses to push a strand of hair behind her ear with the back of her wrist, careful not to touch the clean wool. The rhythm of her work is steady, almost hypnotic. She does not hurry, does not tire quickly. Sarah sits on the floor between her mother's feet, playing with the scraps of wool that fall from the teasing. She has gathered a small pile of the fluffiest bits and is trying to shape them into tiny sheep, rolling them between her palms, pressing ears and tails with careful pinches of her fingers. The sheep are lumpy and uneven, more cloud than animal, but she arranges them in a row on the hearthstone as though they are grazing. She whispers to them softly, "There now, eat your grass," and blows gently on each one to make their wool tremble. Margaret glances down now and then, smiles without speaking, and returns to her teasing. John has come in from the yard after helping his father stack the last of the day's split wood. His cheeks are reddened by the cold. Small flecks of frost still cling to his eyelashes. He stands for a long moment by the open door, letting the chill air rush past him before closing it firmly. Then he goes to the corner shelf and takes down the wooden shuttle his grandfather once used for weaving narrow bands. He sits near the fire on a low stool and begins winding new thread onto the shuttle. Fine woolen yarn dyed a soft madder red last summer. His fingers move with the same patient care he uses on everything. Turn after turn, the yarn wrapping evenly around the smooth wooden body. The shuttle grows heavier, brighter. When it is full, he sets it aside and starts another. Aunt Agnes remains at her spinning wheel, though she has slowed even further in the afternoon light. The wheel turns only when she gives it a gentle push with her foot. The spindle drops lower, twists the thread finer still. Her face is calm, almost serene. The firelight catches the silver in her hair and the faint lines around her eyes. Every so often she pauses to wet her fingers at her lips, old habit to help the fibers glide, then continues. The bobbin fills slowly, the pale gray thread winding in neat layers. She does not count aloud anymore. The rhythm lives in her hands alone. Outside, the village has grown even quieter. Widow Grayson's chimney sends up a single thin thread of smoke, straight as a drawn line. The cooper's workshop is silent now. No more tapping of mallets. Peter has gone inside to eat and rest by his own hearth. A hen scratches half-heartedly at the frozen ground near the churchyard wall, then fluffs her feathers and tucks her head under a wing. The lane lies empty. No carts pass, no voices call. Only the frost continues its patient work, thickening again in the shadows where the sun no longer reaches. Margaret rises to check the dried apples. She turns each slice with a wooden spatula. Some have begun to curl at the edges, their color deepened to amber. She moves the tray a little farther from the direct heat so they will dry more slowly, preserving their sweetness without scorching. Then she takes one of the fresh rye loaves from yesterday, cuts thick slices, and spreads them with a thin layer of butter, saved for special afternoons like this. She passes a slice to each person. First to Sarah, who takes it with both hands and nibbles the edge like a mouse. Then to Eliza, who eats neatly. Then to John, who accepts it with a quiet nod. Finally to Aunt Agnes, who breaks it into small pieces and eats them one at a time. Thomas returns just as the light begins to slant lower still. He has been to the river meadow to cut a few more bundles of rushes before the ground freezes too hard. His arms are full of the long, pale stems tied with twine. He sets them under the eaves to dry further. Inside, he stamps frost from his boots, hangs his coat, and sits heavily on the settle. Margaret brings him a slice of bread and butter. He eats it slowly, gazing into the fire as though reading something there. The afternoon deepens without hurry. Light fades to soft gray through the window. Shadows pool in the corners of the room. The fire glows brighter by contrast, its warmth wrapping around everyone like an invisible blanket. Eliza finishes her last rowlog and sweeps the small wool bits from the table into her apron. John sets the wound shuttles neatly on the shelf. Sarah gathers her wool sheep into a little flock and carries them carefully to the windowsill to graze in the last of the daylight. Aunt Agnes lets the wheel come to rest. She winds the final thread and covers the spindle with a square of linen. Margaret folds the teased wool into the basket, covers it against dust, and moves to stir the small pot of broth she has set simmering for supper. Only water, bones from Sunday's meat, a few dried herbs, nothing more. No one speaks of the passing hours. There is no need. The day simply rounds itself, gentle and complete. As twilight thickens outside, the family draws closer to the hearth once more. Blankets are pulled nearer. Sarah climbs onto her father's lap, already yawning. The fire crackles softly, settling into its evening rhythm. The house breathes with them, slow, even, peaceful. And if this quiet December afternoon has carried your thoughts even deeper into calm, if your own breathing has matched the slow rise and fall of the flames, then the evening will come to meet you just as softly whenever you are ready. Evening comes early in these shortest days of the year. By 4 o'clock, the last pale light has drained from the sky, leaving only a deep, velvety indigo overhead, where stars already begin to appear, one by one. Then, in quiet clusters, as though someone is carefully lighting small lanterns across the heavens. The frost has returned in earnest now. It creeps back over the yard, the roof, the stone walls, thickening the white layer that melted earlier. Every surface gleams faintly under the starlight. The bare apple branches look etched in silver. The air is so cold and still that sound itself seems to freeze. Only the softest crunch of footsteps on the path, only the distant, muffled bark of a dog carried on the motionless night. Inside the Hale house, the hearth fire has been built higher for the long evening ahead. Thomas added 3 thick logs of seasoned oak an hour ago. They burn with a steady, golden glow, flames rising and falling in slow, hypnotic waves. The room is warm at its center, cooler toward the walls and corners where shadows pool like dark water. The smell of the day's baking has softened into something deeper and more comforting. The lingering warmth of rye crust, the faint sweetness of drying apple slices, the rich, savory undertone of the bone broth that has simmered gently since midday on the trivet at the fire's edge. Margaret stands near the table, ladling the broth into wooden bowls. It is simple. Water drawn from the well, bones from Sunday's small joint of mutton, a handful of dried barley, a few slivers of turnip that survived the clamp, and the last sprigs of dried thyme, tied in a bundle and dropped in whole. She has skimmed the surface once or twice to clear the foam. Now the broth is clear, golden at the edges where the firelight catches it. Into each bowl she places a thick slice of yesterday's rye bread, letting it sink slowly until it soaks up the warmth. A small pat of butter floats on top of each serving, melting in lazy swirls. She carries the bowls to the settle and stools one by one, setting them on the low table that has been pulled close to the hearth. The family gathers without words. They simply come together as the darkness settles outside, drawn by the light, the heat, the quiet promise of supper. Thomas sits at the head of the settle, legs stretched toward the fire. Sarah climbs onto his lap as always, wrapping her small arms around his neck and resting her cheek against his shoulder. Eliza sits beside her mother on the bench, folding her hands in her lap until the bowls are distributed. John pulls his stool nearer the warmth, resting his elbows on his knees. Aunt Agnes settles into her low chair, shawl drawn tight, the firelight softening the lines of her face. They eat in the gentle hush that belongs to winter evenings. Spoons move slowly, lifting broth and softened bread to lips already warmed by the room. Each mouthful is savored, the faint salt of the butter, the subtle sweetness of the turnip, the deep comfort of the barley that has swelled and thickened the liquid. Sarah blows on her spoon for a long time before each bite, watching the steam curl upward like tiny clouds. Eliza eats neatly, careful not to drip. John dips his bread again and again until it is saturated and soft. Aunt Agnes takes small sips, pausing between each to let the warmth spread through her chest. No one speaks much at first. The only sounds are the soft clink of spoons against wood, the crackle of logs settling in the fire, the faint bubbling of the pot still on the trivet. Outside, a shutter creaks once as the house cools, then silence returns. When the bowls are empty and the last crusts eaten, Margaret clears the table with slow, careful movements. Eliza helps, carrying bowls to the washing bucket. John pours warm water from the kettle over them, swirling each one clean with his hand. The bowls are set upside down on the shelf, the spoons wiped dry with a rough cloth. Sarah carries the small butter dish back to its place, walking on tiptoe so her footsteps make no sound. With supper finished, The evening opens into its quiet, unhurried hours. Aunt Agnes returns to her spinning wheel, though her hands move even more slowly now. The wheel turns with a gentle nudge of her foot. The spindle drops, twists the thread finer still. The hum is low, almost a whisper, part of the room's breathing rather than separate from it. She does not look at her work. Her eyes rest half-closed on the fire, as though listening to an old, familiar story told in silence. Eliza has brought out her embroidery hoop again. She sits close to the hearth, stitching tiny stars in pale yellow wool across the linen. Each cross is perfect, small. She counts them sometimes under her breath, though the pattern lives mostly in her fingers now. The needle flashes in the firelight. The wool gleams softly against the fabric. She pauses now and then to rethread, licking the end of the wool and guiding it through the eye with care. John has taken the wooden puzzle box apart once more. He sits on the floor near his father's feet, turning the pieces slowly in his hands. He tries fitting them together in new ways. Not to solve it quickly, but to feel the shapes slide and click, to hear the soft tap when two pieces find each other. There is no hurry in his movements. He simply explores, patient as the turning night. Sarah has grown drowsy against her father's chest. Her small hand clutches the edge of his coat. Her breathing has slowed to match the rise and fall of his own. Thomas rocks her gently, barely moving, just a slight sway of his shoulders. He hums the same low, wordless tune he always does at this hour. The sound blends with the fire's crackle. The wheels hum. The faint rustle of Eliza's needle through linen. Margaret sits beside Thomas on the settle, her own hands idle for once. She has unpinned her coif. Her hair falls in soft waves down her back. She leans her head against her husband's arm, closes her eyes, and lets the warmth of the room wrap around her. Her breathing deepens, slows. In the firelight, her face looks peaceful, carved from the same quiet years as the house itself. The evening deepens without announcement. Light from the hearth flickers across the walls in slow waves. Shadows lengthen and soften. The fire settles lower. Coals glowing red beneath a fine veil of ash. Outside, the frost thickens further. The stars burn brighter, colder. A single owl calls once from the orchard. Low, soft, almost a sigh, then falls silent. The village sleeps. Only the faintest glow leaks from a shutter here and there. Inside, time feels suspended once more. No clock ticks. No voice urges the hour forward. The room simply holds them. Warm, calm, complete. One by one, the children are carried or led to the loft. Sarah first, limp and warm in her father's arms. Eliza next, setting her hoop carefully aside and climbing the ladder with sleepy steps. John last, placing the puzzle pieces back in their box with the same slow care. Thomas and Margaret remain by the fire a little longer. They sit shoulder to shoulder, hands loosely clasped. They speak in murmurs, about the wood that should last until 12th night, about the calf blossom may carry in spring, about how Eliza's stitches grow finer each week. The words drift and settle, small and unhurried. When the fire has burned low enough, Margaret rises to bank it, piling ash over the coals with gentle sweeps of the poker. Thomas blows out the single rushlight. Darkness comes soft, complete, broken only by the faint red pulse beneath the ash. They climb the ladder together. Blankets are drawn high against the cold that seeps through the thatch. Breathing slows to match the breathing of the sleeping children nearby. The house settles into its deepest quiet. The frost continues its patient work outside. The stars wheel overhead. Another ordinary winter evening passes in Thornwick. Gentle, unbroken, eternal in its simplicity. And if this soft evening has carried you deeper still into rest, if your own eyelids feel heavy now, your limbs loose and warm, then the next quiet morning will find you waiting whenever you wish to meet it. The night has deepened now, and the house lies wrapped in its own quiet darkness. It is the small hours, somewhere between midnight and the first faint promise of dawn, when the world outside feels farthest away. The frost has grown thickest during these still hours. It has traced delicate fern patterns across the inside of the oiled linen window panes, turning the glass into something almost lace-like. The thatch roof above creaks once, softly, as the timbers contract in the cold. No wind moves, no creature stirs in the yard. Only the slow, even breathing of the sleeping family fills the loft, rising and falling like the gentlest tide. Downstairs, the hearth holds only the faintest red glow beneath its blanket of ash. The coals pulse dimly, small, steady heartbeats of warmth that will carry through until morning. The iron pot sits cold now on the trivet. The last traces of broth have cooled into a thin skin across the surface. The rye loaves on the rack have settled completely, their crusts hardened in the night air. The basket of carded wool rests covered on the table. The spinning wheel stands silent, its thread wound neatly, waiting for the first light. In the loft, under heavy woolen blankets and the low slant of the thatch, the family sleeps deeply. Sarah lies curled on her side, one small hand tucked beneath her cheek, the other loosely holding the edge of her blanket. Her breathing is soft, almost soundless. Every so often her lips part in a tiny sigh, as though dreaming of warm bread or woolen sheep. Beside her, Eliza sleeps on her back, arms at her sides, face peaceful and still. The embroidery hoop has been set carefully on the small shelf near her head. Even in sleep her fingers twitch once, as though stitching invisible crosses through the dark. John lies stretched out, long limbs taking up more space than they did last winter. He sleeps soundly, one arm flung across the straw mattress, chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. Thomas and Margaret share the wider bed at the far end of the loft. They lie close together beneath the shared blanket, her head resting in the curve of his shoulder, his arm draped loosely around her. Their breathing has found the same slow cadence. In sleep, their faces soften, lines smoothed by years of quiet nights like this one. The straw beneath them rustles faintly when one of them shifts, then settles again into silence. The house itself seems to breathe with them. The beams overhead contract and expand with the changing temperature, making small, almost inaudible creaks. The packed earth floor downstairs holds the day's warmth longer than the walls do. It radiates upward in faint waves. The wooden latch on the door rests secure. No draft finds its way beneath. Everything is held, protected, resting outside. The village of Thornwick sleeps under the same deep frost and starlight. Widow Grayson's cottage lies dark, her cat curled tight against the hearthstone inside. The cooper's workshop stands silent, barrels half-finished leaning against the walls. The church at the center of the hamlet keeps its own quiet vigil. The bell in its small tower hangs motionless, waiting for the hour that will come with morning. Fields stretch away into shadow, wheat stubble silvered, hedges rimed white. The river meadow a pale ribbon under the stars. No lantern glows anywhere, no footstep sounds on the lane. Time passes without measure. The stars wheel slowly overhead, their light cold and distant. The frost thickens further, layer upon layer, until the world outside looks carved from pale crystal. Somewhere far off a fox barks once, sharp, brief. Then silence returns deeper than before. In the loft, Sarah stirs faintly. She turns over, murmurs something wordless, and settles again with a small sigh. Eliza's hand opens and closes once in sleep, fingers brushing the edge of her blanket. John's breathing hitches for a moment, then evens out. Thomas shifts his arm slightly, drawing Margaret closer without waking. She nestles nearer, her breath warm against his neck. The night holds them all gently. No dreams disturb the calm. No worries press against closed eyelids. Only rest, deep, unbroken, ordinary rest that has been the same for generations in houses like this one. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the darkness begins to thin. Not yet dawn, not even the first gray hint of it, but the smallest, softening at the edges of the sky. The stars lose a fraction of their sharpness. The frost on the window panes glimmers with the faintest reflected light. The house seems to sense it. A beam creaks once more, softer this time, as though stretching after long stillness. In the loft, the breathing continues. Slow, even, peaceful. Sarah's small hand uncurls. Eliza's face turns toward the window, though her eyes remain closed. John draws one knee up slightly under the blanket. Thomas and Margaret lie unchanged, wrapped in each other and the quiet years. The coals in the hearth downstairs pulse once, brighter for a moment, then settle again. A thin thread of warmth rises, curling upward through the floorboards. The room waits, and so the longest night of the year passes without fanfare. Quietly, gently, as all such nights have done in Thornwick for as long as anyone can remember. No great events mark it. No loud sounds break the silence. Only the slow turning of the earth, the patient work of frost, the steady breathing of a family asleep together under one roof. If this deep, unbroken night has carried your own thoughts into the same soft stillness, if your body feels heavy now, sinking deeper with every slow breath, then perhaps the first pale light of morning will find you still resting here, safe and calm when the moment arrives. The first faint gray light of morning begins to seep through the cracks around the shutters, slowly, almost reluctantly, as though the day itself is still half asleep. It is now the 10th day of December in 1697, and the longest nights have begun to shorten by the smallest measure. The frost on the window panes has thickened overnight into intricate patterns that catch the earliest light and scatter it in pale, shimmering fragments across the packed earth floor. The thatch roof above holds its silence. No birds yet call from the bare orchard branches. The air outside remains bitterly still. The cold, so deep it seems to press against the walls of the house like a quiet weight. Inside, the hearth coals still glow faintly beneath, their ash blanket, small, red eyes that have kept watch through the dark hours. Thomas wakes first, as he always does. He lies still for a long moment, listening to the slow, even breathing of his family around him. Sarah's tiny sighs, Eliza's soft inhalations, John's deeper rhythm, Margaret's calm rise and fall beside him. Then, without hurry, he slips from beneath the blankets, pulls on his woolen stockings, and descends the ladder in careful steps so the rungs do not creak too loudly. Downstairs, the room feels cooler than the loft. Night. Air has settled in the lower spaces, but the residual warmth from the coals keeps the worst of the chill at bay. Thomas kneels at the hearth, brushes aside the ash with gentle sweeps of his palm, and coaxes the embers back to life. A few dry pine needles first, gathered yesterday and kept in a small bundle near the fire. Then thin kindling splits, then a thicker piece of ash wood laid across them. He blows softly, 3 slow breaths, until the flames appear, small and golden, flickering upward with hesitant life. The fire breathes again. Warmth begins its slow spread across the floor, up the legs of the trestle table, along the walls. Margaret stirs soon after. She comes down wrapped in her shawl, hair still loose beneath her night coif. Without a word, she takes the kettle, now cold and heavy with overnight ice, and sets it over the growing flames. While the water heats, she sweeps the hearth clean once more, gathering yesterday's ash into the wooden pail. The besom moves in wide, whispering arcs. The sound blends with the soft crackle of the new fire. The children wake gradually, drawn by the light and warmth that creeps upward through the floorboards. Eliza descends first, rubbing her eyes and pulling her blanket around her shoulders like a cloak. John follows, stretching his arms wide before climbing down. Sarah is carried by her mother. She nestles against Margaret's neck, small face still flushed with sleep, murmuring something soft and wordless. They gather near the hearth without speaking, sitting on stools, on the settle, on the low bench, letting the fire thaw their fingers and toes, one slow inch at a time. Breakfast unfolds in the familiar, gentle rhythm. Margaret measures oats into the brown pot. 4 handfuls again, for the cold lingers longer each day. She adds salt, stirs once, and sets the pot at the fire's gentle edge. Thomas brings fresh milk from the barn. The pail steams as he crosses the threshold, frost still clinging to his coat sleeves. He pours a little into each wooden bowl, the cream thick and pale at the surface. When the oats have thickened, steaming, smooth, faintly sweet, he spoons them out. Each bowl receives a swirl of milk, a small pat of butter dropped in the center to melt and pool golden. The rye bread, now 2 days old, is sliced thin and toasted, lightly at the fire's edge until the crust crisps and the inside warms through. They eat sitting close together, spoons moving without haste, blowing on each mouthful until the heat is just bearable. Sarah eats slowly, offering tiny spoonfuls to her father between her own bites. He accepts each one with a quiet nod and a murmured, "Good, love." The meal passes mostly in silence. Only the fire speaks, crackling softly as new wood catches, and the spoons clink against bowls. Outside, a single wren calls once from the hedge. Sharp, brief, then falls quiet again. After breakfast, the morning tasks begin without announcement. Thomas pulls on his heavy coat, winds the scarf high around his neck, and steps out to tend the animals. The barn door opens with a low creak. Inside, Blossom and Moore stand quietly, their breath making thick, white clouds in the dim light. He forks fresh straw beneath them, breaks the ice on the water trough with his boot heel, milks them slowly. The milk streams warm and steady into the pail. The sound is rhythmic, soothing. When he returns, he sets the milk in the cool corner and hangs his coat near the fire to thaw. Margaret begins the day's mending. She sits at the trestle table, near the window where the pale morning light falls strongest. Today it is Thomas's woolen breeches, worn thin at the knees from years of kneeling in the fields. She patches with sturdy wool cloth, stitching in small, even rows that disappear into the fabric. The needle moves steadily. The thread pulls through with a faint whisper. Every few stitches she smooths the wool flat with her palm, feeling for any roughness that might chafe against skin in the coming colder weeks. Eliza helps her mother first by sweeping the floor. Wide arcs with the birch besom, gathering the small bits of straw and earth that have drifted in on boots. Then she carries armfuls of dry kindling from the stack under the eaves and builds it neatly beside the hearth in careful layers. When the sweeping is done, she sprinkles a little water from the dipper and sweeps again, darkening the earth so dust will not rise later. John has gone to the well with the yoke across his shoulders. The path is frozen hard. His boots crunch with each step. He lowers the buckets one by one, winds the rope slowly, pulls them up dripping and silver bright. The water is so cold it stings through his mittens. He makes 2 trips, filling the house buckets and the larger barrel inside the door. Each time he returns, he stamps frost from his boots, warms his hands at the fire for a moment, then goes out again without complaint. Sarah follows wherever she can. She carries a small basket of kindling, sticks, gathered yesterday, and places them one by one beside the hearth. She pauses often to watch the flames, holding out her hands to catch the warmth, or to pick up a stray crumb from the table and carry it carefully outside to the hens. Her cheeks pinken in the cold air. When she returns, Margaret wraps her in an extra shawl and sits her on the low stool, near the fire with a scrap of bread to nibble. Aunt Agnes has settled at her spinning wheel closer to the hearth today. The wheel turns with a low, steady hum when she nudges it with her foot. She draws the flax in long, fine strands, twisting them between finger and thumb before letting the spindle drop and spin. Her fingers move without looking. Her eyes rest half-closed on the fire. The thread winds onto the bobbin in pale gray spirals, growing thicker as the morning passes. Every so often she pauses to wind a finished length onto the niddy-noddy, counting the turns under her, breath out of long habit, then begins again. By mid-morning the frost has begun to melt in thin patches where the sun's weak rays reach. Small drops form at the edges of eaves, fall slowly, tap against the stone step below. The yard turns from white to muddy brown in spots. Boots leave darker prints now. The sky holds a thin, pale blue, streaked with high, motionless clouds. Thomas walks to the churchyard to speak with the sexton about the shared woodpile for the coming weeks. Simple. Matters of how much oak remains, how much ash can be cut before the deep freezes set in. He carries a small bundle of kindling as a gift, wrapped in an old sack. The path is crisp underfoot. His steps make a steady crunching sound. Along the way he nods to neighbors. Widow Grayson sweeping her frozen step. Young Peter splitting kindling outside his workshop. Words are few. A raised hand, a quiet morning, and on he goes. Back at the house, Margaret has moved to kneading dough for tomorrow's baking. She works on the long table, hands and forearms dusted with rye flour. The dough is heavy, dense, rye and barley mixed with the last of the sourdough starter. She folds and presses it over and over, turning it with slow, strong movements until it grows smooth under her palms. When it is ready, she shapes it into 2 large rounds, scores the tops, and sets them near the hearth to rise in the gentle warmth. The morning continues in its patient way, one small task following the next. Water carried, floors swept, thread spun, dough kneaded. A child hums softly. A fire crackles and settles. The frost retreats, drop by slow drop. Nothing hurried. Everything arrives in its own quiet time. And if this ordinary winter morning has wrapped itself gently around your breathing, if your own body has begun to feel as calm and heavy as the old settle by the hearth, then the afternoon will come to meet you just as softly. Whenever the moment feels right, the afternoon arrives with the same gentle reluctance as the morning light. Slow, pale, almost hesitant. It is still mid-December, and the sun has climbed only a little higher than it did yesterday. Its rays slant low through the thin clouds, casting long, soft shadows across the yard and the frost-softened fields beyond. The frost that melted in patches during the brief midday warmth has already begun to reform at the edges of things, along the north side of the house wall, beneath the eaves, in the deep shade of the apple trees. The air holds a crisp stillness. Every breath clouds white for a long moment before fading. No wind moves the bare branches. They stand motionless, as though listening to the quiet of the season. Inside the Hale house, the hearth fire has settled into a steady, even burn. The oak logs Thomas laid earlier glow with deep red hearts, sending up small, lazy flames that flicker without hurry. The room feels warmer now, the chill pushed back to the corners where it lingers only faintly. The smell of fresh dough rising near the hearth mingles with the faint sweetness of the dried apple slices that still sit on their tray, now soft and chewy from the slow heat. A thin thread of wood smoke drifts upward, curling lazily toward the hooded chimney. Margaret has moved her work to the settle closer to the fire. She sits with a pile of woolen stockings in her lap. Thomas's, John's, even the small ones belonging to Sarah, mending the thin places at heels and toes. Her needle is bone, polished smooth. The thread is dark wool spun last autumn. She stitches in small, tight rows, darning over and over until the whole disappears beneath a neat lattice of thread. Every few stitches she pauses to smooth the wool flat with the flat of her hand, feeling for any lump that might rub against skin during the long, cold walks to the well or the fields. The work is quiet, repetitive, almost meditative. Her breathing slows to match the rhythm of her needle. Eliza sits on the low bench beside her mother, her own hands busy with a different mending. A tear in Sarah's little night shift, caught on a nail in the loft ladder 2 days ago. She uses finer thread and smaller stitches, copying the way Margaret has shown her. The needle moves in and out with careful precision. Each pull of the thread is slow, deliberate. When the tear is closed, she ties off the knot on the inside, smooths the fabric flat, and holds it up for inspection. Margaret nods once, a small smile touching her lips. That's well done, love. She'll not feel the mend at all. Eliza folds the shift neatly and places it on the shelf beside the others. Sarah has found her place on the floor near the hearth again. She sits cross-legged on the old blanket, surrounded by her small flock of wool sheep from yesterday. She has added a few more today, lumpier, even softer, made from the scraps that fell while carding. She arranges them in a careful circle, whispering to each one as she sets it down. Stay warm now. The frost is coming again. Every so often she reaches for a scrap of wool, rolls it between her palms, and adds another tiny creature to the flock. The firelight dances across her face. Her cheeks are pink from the nearness of the heat. She hums softly, a tuneless little melody made of the sounds she hears: the crackle of logs, the faint creak of the house settling, the slow turning of Aunt Agnes's wheel in the corner. John has come in from the yard after checking the fences along the back field. His coat is dusted with frost that has reformed in the shade. Small crystals cling to the wool like tiny diamonds. He hangs the coat near the fire, stamps his boots once to loosen the earth, then sits on a low stool and takes up the whetstone again. Today it is the small hand axe that needs sharpening, the one used for splitting, kindling, and trimming branches. He pours a few drops of oil from the jar onto the stone, then draws the blade along it in long, even strokes. The sound is rhythmic, soothing. Scrape, 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 followed by the soft wipe of the oiled cloth. He tests the edge carefully with his thumb, nods to himself when it bites just right, and sets the axe aside on the shelf where the other tools wait in quiet order. Aunt Agnes has not moved far from her spinning wheel all day. The hum has become part of the room's gentle background. Low, constant, like the breathing of the house itself. Her thread grows longer still. The bobbin is nearly full again. She draws the flax in fine, even strands, twists them between finger and thumb, lets the spindle drop and spin. Sometimes she pauses to wet her fingers at her lips, old habit, to help the fibers glide, then continues without hurry. Her face remains calm, eyes half-lidded against the firelight. The work flows through her hands as naturally as breath. Outside, the village carries on its own slow afternoon. Widow Grayson has lit her fire early. A thin line of smoke rises straight from her chimney into the still air. Young Peter the Cooper can be heard tapping gently at a stave inside his workshop. The sound comes in measured, unhurried beats. A hen scratches at the frozen ground near the churchyard gate, then fluffs her feathers and settles against the wall. The lane lies empty, no footsteps, no cartwheels. Only the frost continues its patient work, creeping back across the grass and the thatch in delicate white patterns. Margaret rises to check the rising dough. She lifts the cloth. The rounds have swelled into smooth domes, the surface faintly dimpled where the yeast has worked its quiet magic. She shapes them once more with floured hands, pressing gently, then scores the tops again with a quick cross. The oven has been heated. Its mouth glows dull orange. She slides the loaves in on the long wooden peel. The heat meets the dough with a soft hiss. She closes the iron door and turns back to her mending, letting the slow baking do its work. As the light outside begins to slant even lower, turning the sky to soft lavender at the edges, Thomas returns from a final walk around the orchard. He has gathered the very last windfalls, small, hard, half-frozen, and carries them in his coat pockets. Inside, he sets them near the hearth to thaw slowly. Later, they will be pared and strung on twine to dry for winter pies. He sits heavily on the settle, stretches his legs toward the fire, and accepts the mug of warmed small beer Margaret brings him. He drinks it slowly, gazing into the flames as though seeing the days ahead laid out there. The afternoon slips away without announcement. Light fades to twilight through the window. Shadows lengthen across the floorboards. The fire glows brighter against the growing dark. The smell of baking bread begins to rise again. Deep, warm, wrapping the room in comfort. Eliza finishes her last mend and sweeps the small threads from her lap into her apron. John banks the fire a little higher for the coming evening. Sarah gathers her wool sheep into a neat pile and carries them carefully to the windowsill. Aunt Agnes lets the wheel come to rest. She winds the final thread and covers the spindle. Margaret opens the oven door. The loaves come out golden brown, tapping hollow when she knocks the bottoms. She sets them to cool, the crusts crackling softly as they settle. Everything is in its place. The day rounds itself gently, complete. The house breathes with the family, slow, even, peaceful. And if this quiet December afternoon has settled something deeper inside you, if your shoulders have softened, your breathing slowed to match the fire's gentle rise and fall, then the evening will wrap itself around you just as softly when you are ready. Twilight gathers slowly, as it always does in these midwinter days. First, a gentle dimming of the pale blue sky, then a deepening to soft lavender at the horizon, then the quiet arrival of deep indigo overhead where the earliest stars begin to appear like scattered grains of frost against dark velvet. By 5 o'clock, the light has gone entirely from the fields around Thornwick. The frost that retreated during the brief afternoon, warmth has returned thicker now, tracing silver lines along every blade of grass, every bare twig, every ridge of the thatched roof. The air outside is so still and cold that the silence feels almost tangible. The only sound is the faint, occasional creak of a branch contracting in the dropping temperature. No lanterns have been lit yet in neighboring cottages. The village rests in near darkness, trusting the hearth fires within to carry them through the long evening. Inside the Hale house, the main room glows with the steady amber light of the hearth. The oak logs have burned down to a deep bed of coals, their edges fringed with white ash, sending up small, patient flames that rise and fall without haste. The fresh rye loaves baked earlier sit cooling on the rack near the window. Their crusts have settled into a deep, even brown, and every so often a faint crackle sounds as the loaves continue to shrink, slightly in the cooling air. The smell of warm bread wraps the room still, deep, comforting, familiar, mingled now with the faint, earthy scent of the bone broth. Margaret has set to simmer again for supper, the same pot from last night, topped up with fresh water, a few more dried peas, a sprig of dried sage saved from summer. Margaret stands at the trestle table, ladling the broth into wooden bowls. The liquid is golden now, thickened by the barley that has swollen through the slow hours. She places a thick slice of the new rye bread in each bowl, letting it sink until it soaks up the warmth and softens at the edges. A small pat of butter floats on top of each serving, melting slowly into glossy pools. She carries the bowls to the settle and low stools one by one, setting them on the small table pulled close to the fire so the heat keeps them warm while they eat. The family gathers without need of calling. They drift toward the hearth as the darkness settles outside. Drawn by the light, the smell, the quiet certainty that supper waits, Thomas takes his place at the head of the settle, legs stretched toward the coals. Sarah climbs onto his lap as always, wrapping her blanket around both of them and resting, her small head against his chest. Eliza sits beside her mother on the bench, folding her hands until the bowls are distributed. John pulls his stool nearer the warmth, resting his elbows on his knees. Aunt Agnes settles into her low chair, drawing her shawl higher around her, shoulders against the faint draft that sneaks under the door. They eat in the gentle hush that belongs to winter evenings. Spoons move slowly, lifting broth and softened bread to lips already warmed by the room. Each mouthful is taken without hurry. The faint salt of the butter, the subtle earthiness of the peas, the deep comfort of the sage that has steeped for hours. Sarah blows on her spoon for a long moment before each bite, watching the steam rise in tiny spirals. Eliza eats neatly, careful not to let a drop fall. John dips his bread again and again until it is heavy with broth. Aunt Agnes takes small sips, pausing between each to let the warmth spread deeper into her bones. The meal passes mostly in silence at first, only the soft clink of wooden spoons against bowls, the occasional crackle of a log settling, the faint bubbling of the pot still on the trivet. Then, as bellies fill and the warmth spreads, a few quiet words drift between them. Thomas speaks of the orchard, how the last windfalls should be, enough to string and dry for a few small pies at Christmas. Margaret answers that the dough rose well today. The loaves are lighter than last week's batch. John says he saw a red kite circling high over the river meadow this afternoon, wings wide against the pale sky. Eliza asks if they might save a little butter for the 12th night cake next month. Aunt Agnes murmurs that the flax thread is spinning finer this winter. Her hands still remember the feel of it, even when her eyes grow tired. The conversation floats and settles, small, unhurried, without beginning or end. No one rushes to finish a thought. No one interrupts. The words simply rise like smoke from the fire, curling upward and disappearing into the rafters. When the bowls are empty and the last crusts eaten, Margaret clears the table with slow care. Eliza helps, carrying bowls to the washing bucket. John pours warm water from the kettle over them, swirling each one clean. The bowls are set upside down on the shelf to dry. Sarah carries the small butter dish back to its place, walking carefully so her footsteps make no sound on the earth floor. With supper finished, the evening opens into its quiet, unhurried time, and Agnes returns to her spinning wheel, though she works more slowly now. The wheel turns only when she gives it a gentle push. The spindle drops lower, twisting the thread finer still. The hum is low, almost a lullaby, blending with the fire's crackle and the faint creak of the house cooling in the night. Eliza has taken up her embroidery hoop again. She sits near the hearth, stitching tiny leaves in green wool across the linen sampler. Each cross is small and even. She counts them sometimes under her breath, though the pattern lives mostly in her fingers. The needle flashes softly in the firelight. The wool gleams against the fabric. John has brought out the wooden puzzle box once more. He sits on the floor near his father's feet, turning the pieces slowly, trying one way then another. There is no hurry. He simply explores the shapes, listening for the soft click when two pieces find each other. Every so often he glances at the fire, watching the coals shift and glow. Sarah has grown sleepy against her father's chest. Her small hand clutches the edge of his coat. Her eyelids droop without fight. Thomas rocks her gently, barely moving, just a slight sway of his shoulders. He hums the same low, wordless tune. The sound drifts through the room like a soft thread, weaving itself into the fire's crackle. The wheels hum, the faint rustle of Eliza's needle. Margaret sits beside Thomas on the settle, her hands idle now. She leans her head against his arm, closes her eyes for a moment, and simply breathes. In the firelight, her face looks peaceful, softened by the same quiet years that have shaped the house around them. The evening deepens without fanfare. Light from the hearth flickers across the walls in slow, golden waves. Shadows pool deeper in the corners. The fire settles lower, coals glowing red beneath a fine veil of ash. Outside, the frost thickens further. The stars burn brighter overhead, sharp and cold. A single owl calls once from the orchard, low, soft. Then silence returns deeper than before. The village sleeps. Only the faintest red glow leaks from shutter edges here and there. Inside, time feels suspended again. No clock measures the hours. No voice urges the night forward. The room simply holds them, warm, calm, complete. One by one, the children are carried or led to the loft. Sarah first, limp and warm in her father's arms. Eliza next, setting her hoop carefully aside and climbing the ladder with sleepy steps. John last, placing the puzzle pieces back in their box with slow care. Thomas and Margaret remain by the fire a little longer. They sit shoulder to shoulder, hands loosely clasped. They speak in murmurs, about the woodpile that should last until the new year, about the calf that may come in early spring, about how Sarah's words grow clearer each week. The words drift and settle, small and gentle. When the fire has burned low enough, Margaret banks it, piling ash over the coals with gentle sweeps of the poker. Thomas blows out the single rushlight. Darkness comes soft and complete, broken only by the faint red pulse beneath the ash. They climb the ladder together. Blankets are drawn high against the cold that seeps through the thatch. Breathing slows to match the breathing of the sleeping children nearby. The house settles into its deepest quiet. The frost continues its patient work outside. The stars wheel overhead. Another ordinary winter evening passes in Thornwick. Gentle, unbroken, eternal in its simplicity. And if this peaceful evening has carried you deeper into stillness, if your own breathing has found the same slow, even rhythm as the banked coals. Then the next quiet morning will find you resting here, safe and calm whenever you wish to continue. The night has wrapped Thornwick completely now, deep and soft, as a heavy woolen cloak drawn across the sleeping village. It is well past midnight, perhaps closer to the small hours when the cold reaches its deepest point and the stars seem to stand still above the thatched roofs. The frost has worked patiently through the dark, layering every surface in thicker white. The stone walls gleam as though coated in fine sugar. The bare orchard branches look carved from pale bone. The narrow lane lies silent under a thin, unbroken sheet of ice crystals. No sound moves in the air, no wind, no distant dog, no creak of a cartwheel far off, only the faint, occasional settling of a timber in the houses, and the slow breathing of families asleep beneath their blankets. Inside the Hale house, the loft is dark and warm, held in the quiet embrace of shared sleep. The straw mattresses rustle only when someone shifts in dreams. Otherwise, the breathing is steady, even, a gentle chorus that rises and falls together. Sarah lies curled tight, knees drawn up, one small hand tucked under her cheek, the other loosely clutching the edge of her blanket. Her face is peaceful in the darkness. Every so often her lips part in a tiny sigh, as though the warmth of the blankets has carried her into a dream of summer meadows and soft wool. Beside her, Eliza sleeps on her side, one arm folded beneath her head, the other resting across her chest. Her breathing is light, almost soundless. The faint scent of wool and wood smoke clings to her hair from the day's work near the fire. John lies stretched out at the far end of the loft, long limbs taking up more space than they did even a month ago. He sleeps deeply, chest rising and falling in slow rhythm, one hand open on the blanket as though still, holding the shape of a puzzle, peace in his dreams. At the other side of the loft, Thomas and Margaret lie close together under the shared heavy coverlet. Her head rests in the curve of his shoulder. His arm is draped loosely around her, fingers relaxed against her back. Their breathing has found the same slow cadence. Deep inhalations, long exhalations, mirroring each other without effort. The straw beneath them has settled into the familiar hollows shaped by years, of the same bodies in the same places. Downstairs, the hearth holds only the faintest red glow beneath its thick blanket of ash. The coals pulse dimly, small, patient heartbeats of warmth that have kept the chill from claiming the room entirely. The iron pot sits cold on the trivet now, its surface skimmed with a thin layer that has cooled overnight. The rye loaves on the rack have finished their slow settling. Their crusts are firm, dark, ready for slicing at first light. The basket of carded wool rests covered on the table. The spinning wheel stands silent in the corner, its thread wound neatly, waiting. Everything is in its place, still, quiet, resting. The house itself seems to breathe with the family. The low ceiling beams contract faintly in the cold, making the softest creak once every hour or so. The packed earth floor holds the day's warmth longer than the walls. It radiates upward in gentle waves that reach the loft. The wooden latch on the door rests secure. No draught finds its way beneath the threshold. The thatch overhead smells faintly of reed and smoke, a scent that has become part of the air the family has always known. Outside, the village lies in the same deep rest. Widow Grayson's cottage is dark, her cat curled in a tight ball against the hearthstone inside, tail wrapped around her nose. The cooper's workshop stands silent, half-finished barrels leaning against the wall, waiting for morning hands. The small stone church at the center of Thornwick keeps its own vigil. The bell in its tower hangs motionless. the frost tracing delicate patterns along its iron curve. Fields stretch away into shadow. Wheat, stubble, silvered white. Hedges rimed thick. The river meadow, a pale ribbon under the starlight. No light leaks from any window. No footstep disturbs the lane. Time passes without measure or hurry. The stars wheel overhead in their slow, eternal arc. The frost thickens further, layer upon delicate layer, until the world outside looks wrapped in pale crystal. Somewhere far beyond the village a fox calls once. Sharp, brief, lonely. Then silence returns deeper than before. In the loft, Sarah stirs faintly. She turns over with a small murmur, pulls the blanket higher, and settles again with a sigh that is almost inaudible. Eliza's hand opens and closes once in sleep, fingers brushing the edge of her night shift. John draws one knee up slightly, then relaxes again. Thomas shifts his arm a fraction, drawing Margaret closer without waking. She nestles nearer, her breath warm against his neck, steady as ever. The night holds them all gently, without demand. No dreams disturb the calm. No worries press against closed eyelids. Only rest, deep, ordinary, unbroken rest that has been the same for as long as these houses have stood and these fields have lain quiet under winter skies. Gradually, so gradually it can scarcely be noticed, the darkness begins to thin at its edges. Not yet dawn, not even the first pale gray hint, but the smallest softening of the black overhead. The stars lose a fraction of their fierce brightness. The frost on the window panes glimmers with the faintest reflected light from somewhere far off. A single beam in the loft creaks once more, softer this time, as though the house itself is stretching after long stillness. The breathing continues unchanged, slow, even, peaceful. Sarah's small hand uncurls beneath her cheek. Eliza's face turns slightly toward the window slit, though her eyes remain closed. John's chest rises and falls in the same deep rhythm. Thomas and Margaret lie wrapped in each other, unchanged, resting as one. The coals downstairs pulse, once brighter for a single moment, then settle again into their quiet glow. A thin thread of warmth rises, curling upward through the floorboards like a promise. The house waits. And so another midwinter night passes in Thornwick, without event, without fanfare, simply and completely, as all such nights have done for centuries. The frost keeps its patient vigil, the stars keep their slow turning, the family keeps its shared, gentle sleep. If this deep, unbroken night has carried your own thoughts into the same soft quiet, if your body feels heavy now, sinking deeper with every slow breath, then perhaps the first faint light of morning will find you still resting here, calm and safe, when the moment feels right to meet it. The first pale hint of dawn begins to touch the eastern sky. Soft gray at first, then the faintest wash of rose along the horizon, so subtle it seems almost imagined. It is the 11th day of December in 1697, and the longest nights have begun to yield, minute by minute, to the slow return of light. The frost that thickened through the dark hours still lies heavy across Thornwick. The thatch roofs gleam white under the emerging light. The stone walls carry a delicate rhyming that catches the earliest rays and scatters them in tiny prisms. The air outside is sharp, motionless. Each breath would cloud if anyone were awake to take it. No birds call yet. The wren that sang briefly yesterday remains tucked deep in the hedge, feathers fluffed against the cold. Only the slow creak of a timber settling in one of the cottages disturbs the perfect stillness. Inside the Hale house, the loft holds the deep, shared warmth of sleep. The straw mattresses have molded themselves, to the shapes of the sleeping bodies. Through the night, the heavy woolen blankets rise and fall in gentle unison. Sarah sleeps curled smallest, knees drawn high, one small fist tucked beneath her chin, the other loosely open on the blanket. Her breathing is the lightest, soft, almost soundless sighs that come and go like tiny waves on a still pond. Eliza lies on her side facing the window slit, one arm folded under her head, the other resting across her waist. Her face is calm, lips slightly parted, the faintest flush of sleep still on her cheeks. John sleeps stretched long, one leg bent, one arm flung wide. His chest rises and falls in deeper, steadier rhythm, the sound of it blending with the quiet of the house. Thomas and Margaret lie close together at the far end. Her head rests against his shoulder, hair spilling loose across the pillow of straw. His arm encircles her loosely, hand relaxed against her back. Their breathing has found the same slow, even pace. Long inhalations, longer exhalations, mirroring each other as they have for so many winters. The blankets are drawn high, only their faces and the tops of their heads show above the wool, peaceful in the dimness. Downstairs, the hearth coals still glow faintly beneath their ash blanket. Small, patient embers that have kept the room from falling completely cold. The iron pot sits silent on the trivet. The rye loaves on the rack wait, crusts firm and dark. The spinning wheel stands motionless in the corner, its bobbin full. The basket of carded wool rests covered on the table. Everything remains exactly as it was left the night before. Still, quiet, resting in the gentle certainty that morning will come without hurry. The first true light begins to seep through the cracks around the shutters. Thin, milky threads that fall across the packed earth floor in pale stripes. A single beam touches the base of the ladder, climbs slowly upward. The frost patterns on the inside of the oiled linen window panes catch the light and shimmer faintly, turning the glass into something almost alive with soft sparkle. Thomas stirs first. He lies still for several long moments, listening to the breathing around him. Sarah's tiny sighs, Eliza's light inhalations, John's deeper rhythm, Margaret's calm rise and fall beside him. Then, without haste, he slips from beneath the blankets, pulls on his woolen stockings, and descends the ladder in careful, quiet steps. Downstairs, he kneels at the hearth. He brushes aside the ash with gentle sweeps of his palm, reveals the sleeping embers, feeds them dry pine needles from the small bundle kept nearby. Thin kindling splits follow, then a thicker piece of ash wood laid across them. He blows softly, 3 slow, even breaths, until the flames appear, small and golden, flickering upward with hesitant life. The fire breathes again. Warmth begins its patient spread across the floor, up the legs of the trestle table, along the walls. Margaret wakes soon after. She comes down wrapped in her heaviest shawl, hair still loose. Without a word, she fills the kettle from the bucket. Water skimmed with thin ice that she breaks with the edge of her hand and sets it over the new flames. While the water heats, she sweeps the hearth clean, gathering the ash into the wooden pail for the garden come spring. The besom whispers against the stone flags. The sound blends with the soft crackle of the fire waking. The children stir gradually, drawn by the growing light and warmth. Eliza descends first, rubbing her eyes and pulling her blanket around her shoulders. John follows, stretching before climbing down. Sarah is carried by her mother. She nestles against Margaret's neck, small face hidden, murmuring something soft and half-dreamed. They gather near the hearth, sitting on stools, on the settle, on the low bench, letting the fire thaw their fingers and toes, one slow inch at a time. Breakfast begins in the familiar, gentle rhythm. Margaret measures oats into the brown pot, 4 handfuls for the cold that still lingers. Salt is added. The pot set at the fire's gentle edge. Thomas brings fresh milk from the barn. The pail steams as he steps inside. Oats thicken slowly, steaming, smooth. Each bowl receives a swirl of milk, a pat of butter melting golden at the center. Rye bread is sliced thin, toasted lightly at the fire's edge. They eat sitting close together, spoons moving without haste, blowing on each mouthful. Sarah offers tiny spoonfuls to her father between her own bites. He accepts each one with a quiet nod. The meal passes mostly in silence. Only the fire crackles softly. The spoons clink against wooden bowls. Outside, a single wren calls once, sharp, clear, then falls quiet again. After breakfast, the day will unfold as all days do. Slowly, gently, one small task following the next. Water carried from the well, floors swept, thread spun, dough kneaded for tomorrow's baking, a child humming, a fire tended, the frost melting, drop by drop, under the strengthening light. Nothing will hurry. Nothing will demand more than can be given. The house will breathe with them, warm, calm, complete. The village will stir in its own quiet way. The fields will lie still under the winter sun. The year will turn onward, gentle and unhurried. And so life in Thornwick continues, ordinary, peaceful, held in the slow turning of seasons that have shaped these walls, these fields, these people for as long as memory reaches. If these quiet days and nights have wrapped themselves gently around you, if your breathing has slowed to match the fire's patient rise and fall, if your body feels heavy now, soft against the pillow, ready to let go, then rest here. Let the words drift away like smoke from the hearth. Let the pictures fade slowly behind your eyes. The same calm that holds this old house through every winter night holds you now. Sleep well, wherever you are listening from tonight. Good night, or good morning, whenever the moment feels right.